In just over 12 hours, the world's gaze will turn to Brazil for the opening ceremony of the Olympic Games in Rio. The setting is spectacular, and despite the odd hiccup and hurdle, the city seems ready for a sporting extravaganza. But what do the locals think? And is Brazil the right place to be hosting such an event? Shortly, we'll cross live to John Coates, President of the Australian Olympic Committee. But first, to our reporter Ben Worsley, who's on the ground in Rio. Ben, what's the mood like there?
Well, Matt, Rio is really only just starting to wake up, but believe me, it doesn't take long for Copacabana Beach, where we are, to spring into very vibrant life. Look, to be fair, I think the mood here is let's get on with this. There's been so much discussion, so much concern about these games. Zika, pollution, security, protests, that I think the 500,000 people who will be descending upon Rio, the tens of thousands of people participating in these games, really can't wait for this opening ceremony to get underway. I mentioned security. Right here in the waters off Copa is a very large Brazilian naval vessel, as a reminder of just how big this security operation is. So, Matt, when this ceremony gets underway in 12 hours' time or so, that's one thing that no one here will be escaping.
How have the preparations gone for the Australian team?
Well, it didn't start well, did it? This highly publicised problem the Australian team had with the Athletes Village. I can't tell you how many times a local has, once they find out you're an Australian, apologised on behalf of the entire nation for how they see the athletes in the Australian team have been treated. There's also been concerns with the water quality in the swimming pool and, of course, the pollution in Guanabara Bay, which might affect the sailing team and the rowers. But that all said, the expectations for this team are big. London was a poor Olympics for Australia. 8 gold medals. They're looking to almost double that haul here in Rio. 12, 13, 14 gold medals, which will push Australia towards, if not into, the top 5. It's a big ask. Matt, I guess we'll know in about 16 days' time.
And finally, what about Rio? How does Rio feel about Rio?
That is a very interesting question. There is excitement here. Of course there is, especially when the men's Brazilian soccer team took to the field yesterday. But there is also scepticism about whether Brazil is the right place in the right time to be holding these games. And look, in many parts of the city, it's as if this massive event simply isn't happening at all. We've spent the past week travelling right across Rio asking that very question. What do the locals think about all of this?
The residents of Rio are known as Cariocas, and the city's beaches are where they come to play. On Copacabana, they gather at the southern end, indulging the very Brazilian pastimes of football and volleyball, and sometimes a miraculous combination of both. On this stretch of sand, there's simply no hint the world's biggest event is about to begin, some of it just hundreds of metres away at the other end of Copa. The famous rings are the main attraction here, standing in the shadows of the massive pop-up stadium where the beach volleyball competition will be held. The tourists lap it up. The Cariocas take some convincing.
Brazil spent a lot of money for Olympic Games, actually $32 billion for nothing.
Valentine works on Copacabana selling drinks and renting chairs. 7 days a week, 13 hours a day for around $20 Australian each long shift.
I don't think so for Brazil is ready for these Olympic Games.
Rio de Janeiro.
When Rio was awarded these Olympics 7 years ago, this is where the city came to celebrate. Around 1 million people danced on Copacabana Beach when the word Rio was read out by the head of the IOC. Well, that was 2009, and the Brazil that bid for and secured the rights to hold these games was in a vastly different situation, economically and politically, from the country that's putting on and paying for this enormously expensive event.
Brazil back then was booming. High demand and high prices for its abundant oil supplies and are closing in on becoming the 5th largest economy in the world. But the global commodity slump hit hard. Brazil's now in its worst recession for 30 years. For the state of Rio de Janeiro, the oil slide has been close to catastrophic.
The price used to be $116 per barrel, and now it's between $30 and $40 per barrel. In Rio de Janeiro, our GDP belongs like 33% of our GDP is of the oil industry.
So deep was the impact, Rio's state couldn't pay its police force or meet its social security commitments. Just a month ago, the governor declared a financial calamity. Its chief of staff told 7:30 that allowed a massive injection of federal funds. Without that money, he says, the Olympics would have been jeopardised.
We know after the games, our problems will probably continue, but this help was very, very necessary to create a good atmosphere and good conditions to organize the Olympics and to avoid huge problems during the Olympic times.
And what happens
the games time
afterwards for the hard-working police officers?
After the games, we need to deal with very, very big issues.
The party is going to be very good. Enjoy the party, but the hangover will be for us, not for the tourists. For us, the hangover is going to be very, very bad.
It's not just the economy undermining confidence before the games. The nation is in the grip of a bitter political fight. On Copacabana this week, opponents of Brazil's suspended president Dilma Rousseff urged her impeachment. Part protest, part samba, they're making the most of the international spotlight. Rousseff's accused of cooking the country's books to balance the budget. The final vote on her impeachment is due just days after the Games leave town, and the tension on the streets of Rio is growing.
She didn't name a lot of things that are against the law and against the people. So she can't stay.
Medalha otário, a medalha otário, a medalha otário, o troféu otário, campeão na corrupção.
Adding to the political upheaval is a massive corruption scandal surrounding the state-owned oil company Petrobras. Dozens of federal politicians are under investigation for kickbacks and cronyism.
The political crisis is the major factor of the Brazilian economic crisis. If the decision to hold the Olympics was made today, it would not be the best decision. But once it was taken 7 years ago, it was irreversible.
When a government needs to convince a public that's sceptical about an Olympics, it talks legacy. In Rio, that means a revitalised port district, a new tram system running through the centre of the city, a train line winding out to the Barra district where most of the games will be held, and an athletes' village which will be turned into top-end housing.
They called all my possessions garbage. I was humiliated.
There's another legacy of these games, and for those affected, it's already changed their lives. In February, Heloisa Helena Costa-Berto was evicted from her home of 30 years. She lived in the favela Vila Autódromo, next to what's now the athletes' village in Barra. Her home was among 680 torn down to make way for an Olympic car park.
For the government, I was just a stone in their shoe. They even cut my electricity to make me leave.
No official register has been kept of how many Rio residents have been evicted for the Games. Human rights groups put it in the tens of thousands.
Na semana das Olimpíadas.
Here we are in the week of the Olympics. It's all very beautiful, but it caused a lot of suffering and a lot of discrimination. The Olympics will end, but where is my home?